Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the North Shore Drive podcast. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on. We're going to be talking about the Aaron Rodgers contract. We know what the details are there, but now what does that mean for the rest of the team? What does it also mean about Omar Khan's plans overall? How does that flow into TJ Watt's contract extension? And how does that all play into who they can get to add to this roster at wide receiver? All that and more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, and as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. You remember Edgar Snyder Associates, they also help with workers' compensation. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. You can always find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this show if you enjoy it. Remember, this is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday show that we have. We also have daily content from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, let's talk about the Aaron Rodgers situation. It happened last Thursday evening. Brian and I briefly talked about it on that Friday episode because that was the story. But now the dust has settled a little bit. Everyone's had time to calm down to the reaction of it. And we got to see some contract numbers. Now, for those who haven't seen it, yes, the official total number is about $19 million or so. But that's considering they have $5.8 million in incentives. Only $10 million of that is guaranteed. 3.6 of it is to accrue throughout the season. So basically, right now, this is a $13.6 million contract where if the Steelers, if Aaron Rodgers plays the whole season and they make the playoffs and they go to the Super Bowl, then he'll get the $5.8 million. But Ray, to me, this just all signals Aaron Rodgers said, hey, I'm looking for like $10 million. I'll play for $10 million when he was on the Pat McAfee show a couple months back. The Steelers have been very patient. To me, this all looks like what the Steelers have been saying about they were being patient, and the whole narrative that they were being desperate about this. It kind of puts a pin in that, because now it looks like the things that he's been saying, the things that they've been waiting for, that all came to fruition. And now he's going to be at mandatory minicamp tomorrow, where we'll get to talk to him. He'll be working with the team, and this whole drama will be behind us.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of worked out the way both sides, said it would. Aaron Rodgers went on the Pat McAfee show and said he'd play for $10 million. And, basically he's going to get a little bit more than that. And what the Steelers have said all along, both publicly and privately, is they just have to wait for this process to play out on Aaron's end. He has to deal with his personal issues. And, once he was, comfortable with everything that was going on in his personal life, he signed the contract. So, it's funny. Look, going back to March, Chris, do you remember some of the numbers that were being thrown around for Aaron Rodgers, like $40 million a year?
Yeah, I do.
I mean,
ridiculous.
It was crazy. And it turns out that he signs for, 75% less than that. So, free agency is just a crazy time in the NFL. There's a lot of speculation from people inside the business and in the media business. So the story is finally over. We can finally get down to real business this week with minicamp. 3 days for the Steelers to get on the same page with Aaron Rodgers, 6-week break, and then training camp. For me, Chris, probably the most highly anticipated training camp since I've been covering the team. I've been covering the team full-time since 2012. So buckle up. It's going to be a fun summer up in Latrobe.
It is. And I mean, look, we've seen – we've seen when the Steelers have gotten a new quarterback. You were there for Kenny Pickett. You've been there. There's been all the excitement for new guys, and big additions, guys that you can't wait to see. It's never happened before that this team has just signed a 4-time MVP quarterback who's destined for the Hall of Fame. And now he's coming to the Steelers. Granted, yes, in the twilight of his career, he's not the prime Aaron Rodgers that he was when he was winning those MVPs. But this is a big deal. And then you throw in the other guys that they're adding to this roster, like DK Metcalf. There's a lot of new things to explore about this team. This is not going to be the same Steelers they were last year, even if they end up with a similar record, which I think they probably will. But this is a team that, people talked about change. There's a lot of change going on here, and especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, you look at the contract number that Omar threw at DK Metcalf to finally solve that problem. The idea that they were just basically operating for years without a number one receiver. Now the ongoing situation since Ben Roethlisberger retired, you don't have a quarterback that you can call a franchise quarterback. And Chris, even though it's probably only going to be for 1 year, they could have a guy, if he plays well, a guy who can fit that role. He like you said, he's not going to be the same old Aaron Rodgers. He can't move the way Aaron Rodgers once moved, but he still has the arm. If you've seen some of the highlights from the second half of last season, he could still make all of the throws, and he could be some semblance of a franchise quarterback before you go out and get one, presumably in the 2026 draft. So we've always known that about the Steelers. They were not going to tank. They weren't going to punt on the 2025 season. They were going to try to go out and get the best available option at quarterback. And after 2.5 months of drama, they finally did that.
And I think that's the thing. They went and got that guy. And yes, like you said, Aaron Rodgers is not the same guy that he was, but he does have the same, I guess, mind. That doesn't go away. Reading defenses and how to exploit different things. I think that's what he's really going to bring to the table for the Steelers. They have not had a very cerebral quarterback, I think, ever. Like, when you think, like, even Ben Roethlisberger had his moments where he was cerebral, but the best Ben Roethlisberger moments were often when he was just like, hey, guys, we're just doing this. AB's down there. I'm getting it to him. We're finding a way. And Ben had his cerebral moments, but Aaron Rodgers has built his career on understanding where defenses are and going where they're not. And that's why he has, like, if you look at his stats all time, he has the lowest interception percentage in NFL history of quarterbacks that have thrown, X amount of passes. He has the best average air yards per attempt in NFL history. He has the best passer rating in history. So, like, this is a guy who has made his living in the NFL with efficiency, and that's why he would win NFL MVP. He's led the NFL in touchdowns twice with 48, and when he does that, he's not high up in interceptions. Like, when he got 48 touchdowns, he threw 5 interceptions. That's an insane touchdown to interception rate. Now, again, they're not getting that guy, but I think the question is, Ray, will they see him take a step closer to that? Because the last 2 years that he had been an NFL quarterback, he had 26 touchdowns to 12 interceptions in 2022 when he did his last full season with the Packers. And then last year, his only full season with the Jets, he had 28 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. And those aren't bad, but those aren't close to the efficient numbers that he had posted for most of his career.
Yeah, and I think, last year I don't want to say throw it out, Chris, but completely different situation right in New York. I mean, that was a pretty dysfunctional year there, from the coaching situation to the GM to the ownership. Like I said, he put up good numbers in the second half, but that Aaron Rodgers we saw at Acrisure Stadium in October, that looked nothing like the player that I was used to seeing in Green Bay. So you're right. What does he have left at 41? As you mentioned, the thing that does not go away is his abilities at the line of scrimmage. And listen, it's going to be different from what we saw last year with Arthur Smith and what he allowed Justin Fields and Russell Wilson to do, right? So I can understand, Justin Fields, a young quarterback, pretty limited with what he can do in the passing game. You kind of want to put the reins on him, right? But with Russell Wilson, here's a guy who's seen a lot too, and they didn't even allow him to do very much at the line of scrimmage. And I will acknowledge there's a big difference between Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. Russell was kind of like, he was almost like Ben, right? He played off schedule a lot. Right. With the Seahawks, and you could make an argument that he wasn't until the second half of his career, he wasn't processing the game like you would want. But certainly he developed that over the years. You would have to think, Chris, they don't go out and acquire Aaron Rodgers and not take advantage of his biggest asset. So Arthur Smith's going to have to change. Rodgers is going to have to change in some ways, but with him as the quarterback, it would be silly not to allow him to have full freedom at the line of scrimmage.
Believe it or not, the now signing of Aaron Rodgers now, I think, shifts the Steelers' focus to signing the next big thing that they have to do, and that's not necessarily making a trade or signing a wide receiver. It's getting TJ Watt's extension done, which we've been talking about for a while. Will TJ Watt show up at minicamp? That'll be something interesting to watch. We'll see that. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, Want to remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. While they also help you when you're injured in a car accident, do you know that they also help you with workers' compensation? Because you need to know who decides when you're hurt on the job and who decides when you're better, who decides when your treatment's over, and who decides when your benefits are over. The answer might surprise you. It's always the insurance company's doctors. If that doesn't make you feel good, it's because they won't be on your side. So you need someone who's on your side who will fight for you. That's Edgar Snyder and Associates. Call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's dive into this situation with TJ Watt. I think I fully expect TJ Watt to be at mandatory mini camp. You know, even when he did his hold-in year back in 2021, he showed up for it. He'd do his workouts on the side. But I fully anticipate the Steelers to get it done with him. The question will be, when do they get a deal done with him, Ray?
Yeah, and listen, as you mentioned, 48 hours before the 2021 season opener is when they finally got the deal done with TJ. But we should note, listen, since Omar Khan took over in the spring of 2022, he has been a little bit more proactive in his contract negotiations. It was June 15th of 2022. One of Khan's first orders of business as GM was signing Minkah Fitzpatrick to that big deal. Okay, the next summer, Alex Highsmith is up for a deal. He signs on July 19th, right before training camp starts. So the two biggest contracts in each of those respective years, it's done before you even get to training camp. Now, last year, the big contract was Cam Hayward. That was a little bit complicated just because he's coming off an injury, and that's still a pretty big number for a guy his age. They got that done in September. So it is worth noting, 2 out of the last 3 years, Omar has gotten the big contract done before training camp. Now, does that mean TJ's is going to happen? Not necessarily, but it's something to keep an eye on over the next month or so.
I think that's the thing is we don't know for sure, but I do think that there could be something coming with TJ Watt because I think that the Steelers, if they're in the perspective of they want to just settle things in, because I think another thing we've heard a lot about, and I've written a good deal about what they're working on. They want to get the chemistry of him and Alex Highsmith to be able to move around the defense a bit more, and that takes being able to practice together a bit more. And if he's holding in, and this goes into training camp when the pads go on and they're working those things, it's going to set that progress back. And not that I think is going to be the thing that defines the season. I think you kind of want to get that kind of a thing out of the way. And I think the less time that you spend this being the thing that hangs over your head, that holds back other things that your front office can work on. When you want to get this deal done, he want to get this deal done. Find a way to make it happen. I think it will happen. I don't think it'll happen this week during minicamp, but I wouldn't be shocked if there's a new deal done by or close to the start of training camp, so that the Steelers could do that. But the other aspect that I think could be really interesting about this is now with Aaron Rodgers' contract being done, we're seeing probably about like $18 million in cap space left for the Steelers. You presume Omar Khan still handles the practice the Steelers have always had. They like to keep like $8 million saddled away for the regular season in case an emergency happens. They need to make a trade or use that money to get someone because someone got hurt. So that gives them about $10 million to play with to make other additions to this roster. And we'll get more into who they should get in the next segment. But if TJ Watt extension goes through, Ray, presumably that's going to tack on more money, because when big name players sign big extensions, their new contract usually opens up cap space for the year in which they are signing. So like when TJ Watt did that, it opened up more space in 2021 for the Steelers to make some additions. I could see the same thing happening here, and it might put more incentive on Omar Khan to get this deal done sooner, because let's say TJ Watt's new extension signed, he signs for 3 years, $41 million, whatever, but it opens up maybe $5-6 more million in cap space. All of a sudden now you're up to about $15 to $16 million that you can spend on maybe getting a wide receiver. And that changes the market of what you can trade for or who you can sign to try to bring into your team.
Yeah, you're right. I think they do want to get this done sooner rather than later. Of course, a lot of this, unfortunately for the Steelers, there's a Micah Parsons contract in Dallas. There's the Trey Hendrickson contract perhaps in Cincinnati, and there's the Aiden Hutchinson contract in Detroit that's kind of part of these negotiations. So, that's maybe where the holdup, for the Steelers could be. But to your point, we'll discuss names in the next segment, but it would give them the freedom to maybe go out and sign a guy or acquire a guy in a trade who's got a little bit bigger of a contract. And you certainly want to have that Watt deal done before you make that deal, because Chris, you don't want to have this drag into like August and September last year,
right?
Like you did with Brandon Ayuk, right? Like you want to get that number 2 receiver done before training camp or early in training camp, so they can really lay a foundation with DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers. There's just a lot of new pieces to this offense, and I don't think you want to have an Ayuk situation again, which may or may not happen, right? That was the downfall, really, in a lot of aspects of the Steelers' 2024 offseason. So they ended up having, a good regular season, 10 wins. They got it done with the personnel they had. But I think ideally for the Steelers this year, you get it done before training camp or early in training camp. I think that's the best case scenario.
I'm right with you. That's best case scenario. We'll see if that changes at all over this next week during mini camp. If we hear more conversations and we see TJ Watt, that'll be something else we monitor. But of course, like we alluded to earlier, the Steelers could use now an addition at wide receiver. I want to talk about who those targets are, what they might be going after next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind? Step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training. It's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by third-degree black belt instructors who build confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC Gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today that's only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about what the Steelers could be adding to their roster. Real quick, before we dive into wide receiver, because that's the big one everyone wants to talk about, Jaire Alexander just got cut by the Packers. Big-name cornerback. I know they signed Darius Slay to a $10 million deal. Is that someone you think the Steelers explore at all in this free agency process? Because you wouldn't have to trade for him, but like you pointed out before, they paid $10 million to Darius Slay.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting timing with Green Bay. I know there's been issues with Alexander in years past. I don't know the deep details on it, but I do know he was suspended, I think, for a game or two. Didn't play. So it seems like, I don't want to say he's a problem, but there were some issues in Green Bay. I don't know, Chris, touching a guy like that at this point of the offseason, maybe it would make sense if Slay wasn't here and you weren't paying him $10 million. But the fact that you have Slay on board, you got Joey Porter, I just don't know how and where Alexander would fit in.
I think that's a good question. How and where would he fit in if he was there? Wanted to bring that up because I know somebody was going to at some point. But yeah, so throwing Jaire Alexander just in a box for now. We're just gonna let that simmer over there. Wide receiver 2 is the top priority. I know there were reports out that the Steelers were interested in Jonnu Smith. Of course, as you and I have talked about, I think that was a lot more of Drew Rosenhaus trying to position Jonnu Smith for a better quarterback with the Dolphins, or better contract with the Dolphins than necessarily the Steelers saying, oh yeah, we really are interested in, we really are going to trade for a 30-year-old tight end that's going to, push back Darnell Washington. I think that they're still locked in on that wide receiver 2 position. But the question now becomes, Ray, what type of receiver should they prioritize? Because you have free agents like Gabe Davis, who visited the facility last week. He's now visiting the Saints, so he's kind of making his rounds around the NFL. You have Keenan Allen, who is still available in free agency. You have Amari Cooper, who's still available in free agency. But then there's also the potential for trade targets. Allen Lazard, who you've brought up before, has his experience with Aaron Rodgers. So he's someone that could be gotten probably for relatively cheap from the Jets, maybe a 7th round pick there. And then there's also other guys that are out there. There's the big name everyone keeps talking about is Terry McLaurin. I highly doubt Terry McLaurin ever actually becomes available because the Commanders are going to sign him. But Ray, I think it's going to be interesting to see what type of wide receiver do they really go for. Is it a playmaker? Is it an outside guy? Is it just an overall guy? Is there any type of receiver you're keeping your eye on a little bit closer than the others?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Gabe Davis, as you mentioned, was in. He left without a contract. A lot of times that just means they're not ready to sign him now. They kind of want to wait to see how the market plays out. So then you go and look at some of the other guys and, would be a good fit for Aaron Rodgers. If you have DK Metcalf as your big play guy who's going to go down the field, in a lot of ways, Chris, it would make sense for you to go out and get a possession receiver like a Keenan Allen. Now, I know Keenan Allen he's 33 or he's going to turn 33. So that is, that's getting old for a receiver, but he is by far the biggest name on the market and is by far career numbers wise the most productive. So, I'm keeping my eye out for that. The question is, how would he mesh with Aaron Rodgers? And we don't know that. We do know that Aaron has handpicked Allen Lazard to be on his team with the Jets. You could say that had varying degrees of success. I think once Rodgers was healthy last year, that relationship turned out and produced for the Jets. But I'm leaning towards a guy like Lazard, somebody who has that experience with Rodgers. But I also know that the Jets have to be willing to make a deal. And if they tell the Steelers, oh, we want a mid-round pick for Lazard, well, Omar Khan's not going to do that. You got to get that guy for a 6th or a 7th round pick, or it just really doesn't make sense for your football team.
I think that's the thing, because whatever move they make, the only player I would consider a move that could compromise some of their real draft capital for next season is a Terry McLaurin. If Jordan Addison somehow became available from the Vikings, someone that could be a game-changing wide receiver. And that's the trick here, because remember, the whole point of this is that they're setting themselves up to have a great foundation for next year while also having the draft capital to trade up and get the quarterback that they really want in the first round. That's what this is all for. And if you lose sight of that because you want, I just want to go all in 1 year with Aaron Rodgers, I think that misses the entire point of all the work that you've been putting in right now. So for me, I think the Steelers are they'll take the best player that they can get at wide receiver. They'll look at their options there, but that is capped by how much the cost of their 2026 draft capital, because I don't think they're giving up a first. I don't think they're giving up a second. I think it would be hard for them to give up a third because they do have 3/3. But again, this is all the ammunition you piled up to not just trade up for the quarterback, but have the ammunition behind. After trading up for the quarterback, you could still have a draft class behind that could be part of the youth movement that you've been building. And that's where I think it's going to be tough to see the Steelers be in a position where, they can just go get whoever they want, because teams are going to want, like the Commanders, they're not giving up Terry McLaurin unless they get a pretty good deal, unless Terry McLaurin really does put his foot down. But again, the Commanders got a lot of salary cap space. They're going to find a way to get that deal done.
And doesn't it seem like that's an Ayuk situation all over again, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to be that trade partner that spurs on the negotiation where that guy stays with his original team. So that's the way that's going to play out. So I would put that in the category of probably not going to happen. The one name we haven't brought up, and he's got an injury history, is Chris Olave, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the Saints. I mean, do you want to acquire a guy who's had such a long injury history and a guy who comes with a bigger number? I think in the end, Chris, you're probably going to get a Gabe Davis or a Keenan Allen. We haven't heard too much buzz about Amari Cooper, but I would put him slightly below Keenan Allen. That guy's produced a lot over the years. And I think at this stage of his career, you could certainly label him as a possession receiver. So it's going to be interesting to see which direction the Steelers go. If you go with a guy like Gabe Davis, you got, DK Metcalf on one side and you got a very similar player on the other. But if you go for a possession receiver, I think it can really change your offense. And then, those guys below them would slot in, right? Like Calvin Austin,
right?
A good 3 or a 4. Roman Wilson, potentially a good 3 or a 4. Robert Woods as a 5. I mean, if you get that legit number 2, it certainly slots out your receivers, and you can feel a little bit better about that group going into training camp.
I think that's the thing is you're trying to figure out what's the best fit because you ultimately want to have that group together. I also think that part of it could be, you know what, they want to see how does Aaron Rodgers fit in with a Calvin Austin or a Roman Wilson because, being fair to Calvin Austin, the Steelers haven't exactly had great quarterback play when he's been around, right? Like they've had Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, they've had Mason Rudolph, they've had Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. None of those guys are, quarterbacks that could probably say like, hey, you know what? I'm going to scheme. I have a really fast guy. I'm going to scheme him. I'm going to work within the scheme to say, hey, there's these ample opportunities within our offense to get him the ball quickly and get and use that speed to my advantage. Maybe Calvin Austin flourishes. Maybe so. And I'm not saying he definitely will, but I think this is where the Steelers are probably going to use minicamp to say, okay, how does he look with these guys? How do they look with him? Do they look like they're making progress? Because if Calvin Austin or Roman Wilson look like they might take off this year, maybe you don't need to make as big of a move at wide receiver that could be as seismic. Maybe you could be fine with a Gabe Davis or one of the other guys that wouldn't cost that much money or capital to get. But then again, let's say they don't look good and that you do. It's like, oh, no. We got to go get somebody. I think that's where the Steelers are right now. Are going to evaluate that, keep an eye on things. And then, you look at Jaire Alexander. You never know where contract negotiations and team situations might lead to an opportunity for you to go get somebody that could be advantageous to your roster.
Yeah, and listen, we should also point out that Aaron Rodgers has made a lot of receivers over the years too. Like, do you ever think we'd know who Jordy Nelson was if he didn't play for the Green Bay Packers?
It's a very good point.
Would we know who Randall Cobb was if he didn't play for the Packers, right? So, like, there is that possibility they can get in the mini camp. And they could be, Calvin Austin. Maybe he could be Aaron Rodgers' Randall Cobb, right? Like, so yeah, that's something that certainly will play out over the next 3 days, but more importantly over training camp as well, if they don't get that number 2 receiver sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. He's Ray Fittipaldo. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks so much for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show on your favorite on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Steelers minicamp opens tomorrow. We will have our full crew of reporters on site, ready to go to cover Aaron Rodgers' first arrival, maybe also DK Metcalf first arrival, maybe TJ Watt's return. All that will be covered. Stay tuned for a big week of Steelers news here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.